John, Mark, you leave
Yeah,
Matthew.
yeah. Okay, we can talk about that.
Yeah,
Sure,
let's do
okay.
that.
So now we're going to discuss a little bit about the reliability or not of the gospel accounts of Jesus, because obviously if they were true and historical, then the Christ myth theory wouldn't be true.
Absolutely.
The four Gospels canonically accepted, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. One thing David would say is that he doesn't think that any of the names attached to those documents represent the actual authors.
Right.
And so I'll make a few things I would say about that. One is sort of the surprise of who are the authors. What I mean is Mark, especially, and even Luke. And it's interesting, you have all these disciples mentioned in the Gospels and all these sort of figures of Christian history, but then you have a lesser-known figure of John Mark, and yet his name is attached to this Gospel. He's not like this prominent guy. And to give someone an example of what I mean, if you look at the Gnostic Gospels, they usually have a pretty prominent person attached to them.
Right.
Thomas, Peter, even Mary Magdalene, Philip, these names, and they go out of their way to say, I wrote this, I saw this. It's almost like tipping their hand that they weren't there, which the Gospels never do that. They're a lot more anonymous.
Well, I say there are some giveaways that they're not that they're trying to put something over, but they simply don't say that they are who they're supposed to be, and they give it away that this is happening way in the past.
So John Mark, according to like the book itself and even the Christian tradition, has never been thought of to be an eyewitness to all events. So early Christian tradition, whether it's Papias or whoever, is the idea is Mark was Peter's interpreter.
Exactly, and that's where I was going to go with that.
That's where the account comes from. And there's
and you can't have a better witness than Peter. So it's not so crazy to make John Mark the author of your book for that reason.
But why not?
And when we see this in the second century, we see them saying, "Oh, well, he wrote down everything that Peter said."
Yeah,
you see that argumentation.
If that's the case, why not just call it the Gospel of Peter? It's a roundabout way.
They already had a Gospel of Peter.
They didn't have that until 150, and Mark predates the Gospel of Peter.
Mark is definitely the oldest Gospel we have.
Yeah.
But originally, when Mark wrote a Gospel, there wasn't. He didn't write the Gospel according to Mark. He wrote the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It's the title's right there.
Right. Well,
in the
here's
first
the
line.
thing, though, David. Textually speaking, there's two things you've got to contend against. One is we don't have any copies of any Gospel where the preface, if you want to call it that signatory that says the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to. We don't have any of those that, number one, contradict each other. And here's what I mean by that. You don't have any copies of Luke that have Mark's name or some other random person's name.
Gotcha.
All the copies of Luke that have that beginning part, every single one has the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Luke. Meaning, they always match with it. And here's the second thing.
Wait. Let me address that. Let me address first.
All of our earliest copies that do have this, what you might call, I don't know the technical word, the signatory or that preface.
Right.
All every earliest copy that we have that has that first page of it, they all have it.
Okay.
There's none that don't that are complete.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
You see how that's an argument to be made against your position?
But here's the response to that.
Sure.
What is the earliest ones we have of that? We don't have these things until towards the end of the second century. We have nothing from the first century at all, as far as an early text of the New Testament. But all of these texts that once they get complete, we don't have that until the very end of the second century, towards the end. So there's a 150-year, maybe as much as 200 years blackout period where we just don't know. Right, wrong, whether they're true or not, we don't have any way of matching up what the originals were. But what we do have in our oldest manuscripts is we have evidence of deliberate changes from faction to faction. Yeah, you're right that those titles we have at that point are already settled, but almost nothing else in every single gospel we have is settled.
Well, when you say the blackout period, I mean, did you hear the debate with James White and Bart Ehrman, where he said, okay, if you're going to say that it's a gigantic gap between when the events were supposed to have happened in our earliest copies with the Gospels, what do you say about other ancient documents? And Bart Ehrman said, well, those are ginormous. Exactly. And so, you've seen these lists before, but like Plato's Dialogues, date of original, 4th century BC. Our earliest manuscript is from 900 AD. Homer's Iliad, 9th century BC. Earliest manuscript, 400 BC. Herodotus, 425 BC. Earliest manuscript, 900 AD. Aristotle. You go down the list. Here's Julius Caesar.
Right.
58 BC to 44 BC. The original event's
But here's my
8900.
question. Whenever anybody gives me a list like this,
Yeah.
I say, why are we comparing apples and oranges? You can't prove that the
Ancient
Gospels
documents.
are good. You can't prove that the Gospel's good by
No.
showing how bad Homer's
That's
thing
not
is.
the argument. The argument is to say something like a blackout period. What do you call this then?
Those are huge blackout periods.
So that's a
and
huge
that's
blackout
why,
period.
well, let's take Homer, for instance.
Yeah.
If you try to say that we have the originals of Homer, we don't. We know we
No
don't.
one thinks that we don't have.
If
the,
you
mean like the autographa?
No, I'm not talking.
Homer
I'm
wrote?
not saying.
That's what
I'm
original
not saying
means.
our text that has come to us now was not the original text.
It depends.
No one argues, or if they do argue that, they're wrong to.
Well, it
because
depends what you mean by original text. If you mean scribes and copyists make mistakes, no one that's a textual critical expert denies that. But if you mean the same,
I don't either. I don't. That's
if
not
you
what I'm
mean
worried
the
about.
same-
I'm worried about deliberate changes. I'm not worried about grammatical errors, or spelling errors. That's fine.
So, I mean, there's textual critical studies in every field of any document that was handwritten. So there's Shakespearean textual, textual critical studies.
Sure.
There's not literally, when it comes to every single jot and tittle, if you want to use that phraseology,
Yeah.
none of them, no two copies are exactly identical for any handwritten work. If
Right.
you
But
wrote
again,
two copies
we're
of
not
your
talking-
book, same thing would happen.
Sure.
My point is, though, if you're going to say blackout period for the Gospels,
Yeah.
it's not apples and oranges, it's apples and apples, it's ancient documents.
And I
What
agree.
do you call
What
this?
I'm
You
saying-
call this
what-
a huge blackout period?
Well, here's what I'm saying. If you're saying, well, wait, they all have a blackout period, I'm
Yes.
saying yes, that's absolutely
That is
true.
not my argument. My
Oh.
argument is the Gospels are actually on great firm footing when compared to any other ancient document
Well,
from the time
wait,
of the source
why-
to the time of our first manuscript.
How does that follow? Because just
Because all
Homer,
the others are more. That's the reasonable expectation.
what I'm saying is we can't base our confidence on something like Homer because of that.
Okay, now watch
And
this.
in fact, well, here's the thing: Homer didn't exist either.
Now watch this.
We have at least two different authors who wrote it because we have them in talking in some parts about bronze weapons and some talking about iron weapons.
Here's
They're
the thing,
conflating
though.
two historical periods.
If you're gonna do this, when you critique the Gospels, like the historical narrative, some of the information you do so comes from sources such as Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, even Suetonius.
And
But if
we have to
you're-
modify.
Hold on, David. Just let me
all
finish
right,
my
okay,
point.
go,
I
do,
actually
do,
have not
do,
finished
do.
my point.
Yeah, go.
If you're going to do that, which I'm not necessarily saying is incorrect in and of itself, but
Yeah.
if you're going to do that, you don't see how there's a big double standard to say, I'm going to rely on this ancient source document
here.
that has a bigger blackout period to critique this one, and then say, I'm critiquing it with this document, number one. Number two, I'm critiquing this document for a blackout period.
Gotcha.
Don't you see how to...
Yeah, but here's the thing.
A
I'm
Christian
not
doesn't need to
critiquing-
make this argument. This
Yeah.
is just an argument that says, well, hold on, you need to have a similar standard.
And
The
I get
weights
that.
and measures
and
are
I
not
get
equal.
that. And the problem is, you're telling me that that's what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing. I don't take Homer and use it to
Forget Homer. I
to-
said Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny the Younger. Okay,
Listen,
David,
wait,
what
but
ancient
here's the
sources
thing.
do you use then?
Why do we use those sources? For Suetonius to Tacitus, we modify our trust in them according to how well they're corroborated by other chains of evidence.
But those
And
other
for-
chains of evidence, what's the evidence for those?
Look, for instance of Suetonius, he shows signs of being a critical historian who shows what his sources are, tells us what they are, tells us, weighs out his trust.
But we
of
have
them.
to have all those sources.
But
And they have to have a strong textual tradition. For you to be completely
Exactly.
consistent. Do you see what I'm saying? But it's
and
not.
it's not just textual conditions. They also can be borne out by just historical realities and physical reality, physical artifacts.
So
and things
there
like
is a
that.
good place to go. Your contention, partially from part of your book, is that geography and geology are not friends of the gospel.
Right.
And I would say when we look at all the sort of checkpoints that we have in the gospel, I guess I wonder how you can make that argument. For example, you talk about the pools of Bethesda.
Yeah.
You talk about the pool of Siloam.
Yeah.
You talk about
And that's not even a mistake.
those are confirmations. Like, for example, the 5 colonnades. People back then said, "Oh, there's no 5 colonnades. We haven't
Yeah.
discovered that.
And
Now we've discovered 5 colonnades that are mentioned, I believe, in John 5 is the spot." Or even simple things like, "Show me a coin whose image and inscription is on it." Even that kind of simple thing shows that there's a historical reality, and even
But here's
it's
the
like,
thing.
okay,
Yeah.
this is whose picture's on it.
Yeah.
Or even the types of denominations used. For example, might, you go down and you look, the Bible it doesn't just say money, it names actual denominations, and they're concurrent to what's used, because monetary systems change.
Sure.
See, the thing is,
But wait, I gotta stop you because
are those things true?
Those things are true. But
Okay.
here's the thing: when Luke and I'm going to pick on Luke because I think he's the worst historian of them all. He's not even a historian. When he adds these things, often the facts that he's getting, he's stealing from other historians, and specifically Flavius Josephus.
And your proof for this
is showing textual reliance, where when the two things are showing the same information. First of all, for instance, Josephus will mention something in passing and say, "Oh, there are many such of these." He'll mention 3 of them. All 3 will show up in Luke in the exact same order. And whenever Josephus gives us information, it's always in the right context. It is always more of it, and it fits the flow of the story. Whereas Luke takes things from that, takes it out of context, doesn't always get the information right, and often puts in anachronisms and has someone like Gamaliel talking about Revelation that didn't happen yet, talking things about...
So, let's see, for your thesis to work, you've got to say, I can show textual reliability. He's relying upon Josephus for part of his text. But then, for your thesis to work, you made it unfalsifiable, because then whenever they don't match, like in the case where they mention, where Luke in Acts has these false messiahs mentioned, that Josephus mentions some of them as well, they don't match identically there, what they talk about. You've got to then say, well, that means Luke messed up. But if you're saying, here's places where I know Luke borrowed, and then when they have similar names mentioned, but they don't agree, that's because Luke messed it up. It makes your theory unfalsifiable.
I'm not sure I'm following you how it makes it unfalsifiable.
Because because I would say, no, look, they don't agree here. That's counter evidence to your theory, because they do not agree. You're saying, oh, well, Luke messed up. How would you falsify your theory?
Well, here's the thing, though. I have a whole chapter in the book on falsifying. It's like, if there really was a Jesus, even just a guy named Jesus...
No, not your whole theory. Specifically, Luke's dependability on Josephus. How would I falsify that?
You would say... Well, we would take all the different evidences of direct reliability, of direct reliance on Josephus, and ask ourselves, is it just a coincidence that he just happened to mention these very things and get all the information wrong that we get in Josephus? Or is he taking it from Josephus?
So, for example, like when you say these things about Luke, you realize that, again, this is not as much probably a minority position as a Christ myth theory, but you wouldn't want people to think that this is an accepted idea within Josephine scholarship, or...
Well, no, it's Josephine scholarship who have made that point.
No, okay, so I believe Steve Mason has some idea about that, but see, you can't... I know you don't take him wholesale, because he also believes that the passage of Josephus about Jesus is partially reliable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you want him there, but you don't want him over there, which, okay, but this is not a common idea, and he's only one. There's Louis Feldman, there's lots of other Josephus scholars who don't agree with
it's not that I'm cherry picking, it's just, here's why I think he's wrong here, here's why I think he's right there. I have reasons for every stance I take, I don't... when it bugs me when they say, "Oh, to make mythicism work, we have to do this or that. You have to do that." It's like, I'm not out to make mythicism work. I'm looking at the evidence, and it compels me one way or the other.
So, what's the best example of Luke borrowing from Josephus that you know of? What's the best example?
Of all of them, well, again, I would love to have Richard Carrier's paper with me, where he has 20 pages of all the borrowings of it. If you say the best one. This early in the morning, this undercaffeinated, that would be tough for me to come up with an answer. But certainly, it's whenever he mentions these things, Josephus always has it in the right context. He always has more information. He always has it. It's part of his story. It's not just sprinkled in as window dressings for a fictional story.
Well, I mean, there's... So, for example, the thing is, Luke gives time and time again the correct names of officials.
Sure, but here's the thing. But that also makes huge mistakes that couldn't possibly be true. Well, and no one ever calls him on that on the Christian side.
Okay,
I never hear any Christians
such as.
Well, for the fact that the details of Jesus' trial are completely unhistorical, ridiculously so. And he simply copies Mark's mistakes about that.
You don't think,
and not just about that.
Well, hold on. See, that's not a good argument for you to make, because by definition, you don't think Jesus' trial happened.
Right.
So,
and part of the reason
you're assuming your theory.
Because we know. No. Wait, listen to me. We know.
How could it be correct? If the Christ-myth theory is true, how could Luke have an accurate rendition of Jesus' trial?
Because he wouldn't be saying ridiculous things that would never happen in a trial. For instance, and they dogpile up so fast it's hard to keep up. There's all these violations of Sanhedrin law in this trial. It's a trial by night. It's a trial in somebody's house. It's a trial on the eve of Passover.
That's part of the point, the illegality of Jesus' trial.
Wait, let's take another thing. The fact that they have the Pharisees and Sadducees in cahoots with each other, that's ridiculous. The Pharisees hated the Sadducees.
Wait, have you read...
And they would have loved somebody
David,
like Jesus.
if you read the Gospels, they have that antithetical relationship between the Pharisees and Sadducees. They disagree with each other. It shows in the Gospels, the cahoots they have.
But it also says that the Pharisees hate Jesus. They would have loved somebody like Jesus.
Not all Pharisees hated Jesus, because you have members of the Sanhedrin who, number one, give their tomb, Joseph of Arimathea, for Jesus, and you have Nicodemus coming to Jesus at night.
Well, you could also say Gamaliel, but those are all mistakes too, because Mark says that the Sanhedrin was unanimous.
It's not.
How could it be unanimous if those guys were saying, no, we love Jesus, we're giving him our tomb?
Well, if you remember, it says one of them, I forget which one, wasn't there that night.
Well, the same one that says Joseph of Arimathea wasn't there. All four Gospels disagree on who Joseph of Arimathea was. Only one says he was a member of the Sanhedrin.
Okay, which, by the way, is, again, you know, when you talk about criterion of embarrassment, the fact that you have a member of the Sanhedrin partially responsible for crucifying Jesus being the one to give him his tomb, it's sort of a twist that seems like you wouldn't make up unless it was true, and that's why...
See, that's a slippery slope right there.
No, but it's a relatively... It's like an established thing that even so-called critical scholars agree this Joseph of Arimathea, because of the level of historical...
We haven't even found Arimathea. The only time Arimathea has been mentioned is 4 times, and that's in all 4 Gospels when they've introduced Joseph of Arimathea.
Okay, time and time again, when we supposedly haven't found a town or all this, the question is, does more digging unearth these things? And here's what I would want you to do.
Yeah.
If you read the Nag Hammadi library, which has a lot of these Gnostic documents,
sure.
If you read them through and through,
mm-hmm.
or if you even read some of these newer finds like the Gospel of Judas,
sure.
you will find 1 or 2 physical places mentioned. This is not an exaggeration. I literally mean you will find no other cities or towns. You'll find Jerusalem, and sometimes you'll find sort of Judea mentioned.
Yeah.
That's it. You don't have bodies of water. You don't have modes of travel. You don't have any of that in those.
That's not true.
Here's the point.
Actually, Gospel of Peter and other Gospels, apocryphal Gospels.
Jerusalem. It's in Jerusalem.
But they're just as the River Jordan. They've got miracles that happen.
Wait. Who mentions? Which Gospel that's apocryphal mentions these things?
The Egerton Gospel, which is our second oldest Gospel, comes from a completely unknown Gospel we don't know, showing miracles on the River Jordan.
Okay.
And that's just one. That's just one of dozens of these ones in the 2nd century.
So I went through these. They don't mention these place names. Like when you have the Gospels, you add up. I mean, you've got a certain amount of real people and real places mentioned.
But here's the thing. Why are you taking this argument? Because how does this make Arimathea a real place?
No.
The best you can say is we've never found it yet.
No, here's my point. Fabrications and myths don't look the way the Gospels and Acts look.
Oh, that is so not true.
Okay.
So not true.
If that's true, then here's the reason why I mention it. Because when you go through them, they don't mention all the place names and towns. They don't do it. They don't have...
That's your criteria?
No.
Sorry,
that's not my argument. No, you don't.
Yeah.
I don't think you see. That's not my argument for the reliability of the Gospels. That's my counter argument to your claim that they're just...
I'm just saying they make mistakes. That's all I'm saying. And he tends to make less mistakes about Rome than he does about Judea.
Let's just...
And not just geographical, but like just basic Judaism 101 mistakes, repeated misquotes of scriptures. There's all these different
you got to give examples. You can't just say like
I've got a book, baby. I've got a 250-page book that's full of examples.
You gotta. The thing is, when I read your book, it's a little troubling because it's not like you have footnotes, and so I can check up what you say. You'll just say the trial didn't go by normal standards that we know of.
And you know what? That's a fair cop.
How in the world am I supposed to?
Here's my promise to you.
Take your word
Here's
on it.
my promise to you.
Yeah.
And I said this as much to you off camera that I would love you to be a beta reader for a book because that's what I need to do because there's so much stuff that I've internalized, these arguments. I need to be very scrupulous. I felt like there was a ton of footnotes, but of course, you could never have too many footnotes.
And I'm not making the argument. Look,
I get that.
I'm not making the argument, just so you hear me, that every book needs to just be doused in footnotes.
I've heard people give that.
I'm not saying that a book with a lot of footnotes is right.
Sure.
I'm not saying anything like that.
But it would be helpful to at least not just...
all I'm saying is, even to say, like, according to so-and-so in their paper and this, and people can find it based on that. All I'm saying is, like, when I go through the book, I can't I can't
Yeah.
like really check up on most
It's a
of your
fair
stuff.
cop.
I
It's
have
a
to
fair
like
cop.
I have to like comb through to say what's
Yeah.
he mean here.
Yeah.
Because you're just kind of making claims, but
You know,
how do we
and,
follow
and that's
up?
why I'm making another book. So we will.
All right,
This is not over. This is just beginning.
Well, I'll be a beta reader.
Groovy. That's
All
10.
right, yeah, there's 10 or 15. Okay, so what's
How you holding up?